So, good afternoon, everyone. Right after lunch, I think we have probably one of the most exciting and most important sessions of the day. India's states today are more critical to the everyday life of India than the government of India. And I say this as we sit in New Delhi to make the point that it is the everyday life of India, whether it is in our business, whether it is when it comes to accessing public services, whether it comes to infrastructure, all of that is conducted at the states. And here's a quick stylized fact just to give you a sense of how important states are. Between 1991 and 91 and 2016 and 17, the total size of states as a ratio of expenditure over GSDP has increased significantly, while the total size of the center has simultaneously shrunk. In 1990-91, the total expenditure of states was 11.7%. This increased to 14.7%, while the center shrunk from 17.2% to 12.83%. No surprise then that our Prime Minister has repeatedly said that states are the drivers of growth, that states are the real engines of transformation for India. And to discuss the role of states, what exciting innovation is happening in the states of India, and the role that states are playing in moving India forward, we have a panel that really one couldn't beat to discuss the changing nature of states. I have here with me Mr. Amarinder Singh, Chief Minister of Punjab, Mr. P. Sangma, Chief Minister of Meghalaya, Mr. Kamal Nath, Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, Mr. K.T. Rao, Minister in the Telangana government, Mr. Reddy, Minister in the Andhra Pradesh government. States that are driving India forward to discuss the nature of center-state relations and the nature of growth in India today. Mr. Singh, can I start with you? Much as I have said, states are becoming more and more relevant as state expenditure is increasing. We've also in this period saw an increase of centralization as Government of India through centrally sponsored schemes, through planned funds in the days of the Planning Commission and now centrally sponsored schemes and central schemes have increasingly begun to take over in terms of expenditure state subjects. And I know that states have been pushing back and asking questions of the center. The move away from the Planning Commission to the Niti Aayog and the bringing in of the GST and setting up of the GST Council too have been very important innovations in strengthening the dynamic of center state. How do you see this evolve as federalism is going through an important transition in India today?
Well, we emerged as a federal sort of a country with federal states and a lot of powers to the states. And that gradually over a period of time has started diminishing. For instance, when I joined politics 50 years ago, it was a different scenario. There were a lot of powers with states. Today we have none. You mentioned GST. We were told, now all our taxes, for instance, all the revenue that comes to us comes from GST, most of it. We have some from excise duty and some maybe from some mining operations or some very small amounts. Basically it's GST. And we were told that GST would be every month, it would be given to us. Then we were told it would be every quarter. And then it's now every 5 months. And we still haven't got it. And when we get it, and in the meantime, what do we do? To carry on our expenditure, we have to borrow money. Mm-hmm. So these are the sad things that are happening that I don't know how the world looks at our GST, but certainly I look at it from my Punjab's point of view. And in Punjab, we don't have the money which we should have been given. And I'm sure the other states are facing the same crisis. When we Congress chief ministers met the other day, everyone raised this issue of GST being delayed and affecting our overall functioning. So that is something that, one must look at. And the very concept of our constitution, which was federalism, doesn't seem to exist today.
Mr. Nath, could I bring you in on this? You've been a minister both at Government of India back in the day and you're now Chief Minister. And this complex dynamic of centralization and decentralization between center and states has been a tension that has played out in India's governance landscape now for many decades. So your thoughts on how the center-state dynamic is evolving, especially with the change of institutional environment with the Niti Aayog coming into play, and your experience with the GST Council?
Well, the central government, the system we had with the central government, the federal government was the enabler of the states. Now, the moment it starts becoming a disabler You mentioned about centrally sponsored schemes. The centrally sponsored schemes until a couple of years ago were 90%, 10%, 60, 40. That means 90% was paid for by the central government. Take Manrega, Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It was conceived almost 12 years ago. What did it do? It generated economic activity in rural areas. Now, it has become a 60-40 scheme for payments not coming in. So there are laborers, I'm giving you an example, I'm not going into Manrega. So the money, that 60% also doesn't show up. It shows up after 4 months or 5 months. What are you supposed to do with the labor? First, the state government had to find 10%. 90% came from the center. Now the state government has got to find 40% to even avail of it. So this enabling process has got disabled. That is what has happened. The question is that what should the role of the central government be? Should they let the states unleash their potential? Or should they sit and decide how it will be unleashed, when will it be unleashed? Every state has a potential. Whether it's Punjab or Meghalaya or Andhra or Telangana, whatever it is, has potentials of different kinds. So, changing from the Planning Commission to the Niti Aayog is all cosmetic, because a process change, fine. Now, Niti Aayog's role in carrying out studies, they carry out studies, they don't play any other executive role. There was a kind of executive role in the past, when the Planning Commission was there. When you talk of GST, it's the same sordid saga. There's no, I don't think in the history of, in history, forget India, in the world, has there been so many amendments to a single policy. Every month you'll have 5 amendments. It has not been executed properly. And when we were in government, I was a great proponent of GST. But what was the kind of GST we had in mind? How would we roll it out? Now it was rolled out in a manner where the government, central government was unprepared for it, had not taken all the facts into consideration. That's why you have these amendments. If it was a very good thing from the beginning, why did you need this plethora? I think there have been 300-400 amendments to the entire GST. It's never happened. So it's not just having GST. A good thing not executed properly turns out to be a bad thing.
But you could just as well argue that the GST Council was the institutional space to debate and discuss these issues, that this is a complex process, it's a process by iteration. Do you see these as useful forum where these issues can be debated and discussed? And are these just teething problems, or is it something germane?
You see, this GST Council consisting of the states are falling in line with the central government because they may be run by one party. So where is the council? If there are few states and the rest is all run by one party, they come there to sign on the dotted line. It's already determined, predetermined. There is no engagement, there's no interaction, there's no intellectual understanding of the situation. I know of a state where they said that they told me, I had called him up saying there's this meeting and is this your problem? He said, very big problem. I said, then we must raise it. He said, I can't raise all this. I can't raise it because I'll be taken to task by my party. Now, what does the party have to do with a GST issue? So, it's all theory, it's all on paper. And we must recognize this. We cannot shut our eyes to this. The question is, how do we go around it? The central government must realize that at the end of the day, it's the states which will have to deliver. If you are building a road, it's going to be an interstate road, and one state doesn't do land acquisition, you'll never have that road, no matter who pays for it. So we must understand that federalism in its true sense. Then the concept of federalism, times have changed. We have to grow with this change. How the states were perceived 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was first elected to parliament 40 years ago, it was very different. For everything you ran to Delhi. Now you don't have to run. There are certain things you don't need Delhi's help. We needed everything. Today, if you have to import, it's the central government. You have to export, it's the central government. So many of the taxes, you cannot control so many of the things. So the progress which happens in the state, I would put it very squarely and bluntly, the progress which happens in the state is not because of the central government, it's despite the central government.
In fact, there was a really interesting book that talked about the changing dynamic of states post-1991 that said the title of the book was Federalism Without the Center as the Future for India. But Mr. Rao, if I could bring you in here, we've heard a lot about the creeping centralization and the complexity of the dynamic between centers and states that sometimes come in the way. Yet, we were just speaking before and you were talking about how much Telangana has done to improve ease of business within these confines. If you could just talk a little bit about those innovations that you have implemented and how have you as a state been able to work through these tensions of having to run to New Delhi for lots of, for the glorious North?
Firstly, we continue to run to New Delhi without question. I think that's not gone away. But nevertheless, I think we have done some things which are very much within our confines, within our limitations, which I think have yielded good results. In the last 5 years, see, we are the youngest state in India. Telangana is the newest and youngest state in India. We were the 29th state, and I think we became 28th recently after the abrogation of Article 370. So in the last 5 years, in fact, Telangana has done some truly revolutionary and benchmarking things. One of the things we've done, we've come out with a unique policy to approve and to process any industrial clearances that have to be given by the state. We've come out with a policy called as the TSI Pass. What it stands for essentially is Telangana State Industrial Approval, Project Approval and Self-Certification Committee. Now, this enactment of the legislature, which happened about 5 years ago, has delivered wonderful results for us. I'll just give you 3 salient features of this policy. First thing is, if you have a piece of land in the state of Telangana, which has been allotted by the government, or you may have procured it yourself, you do not have to apply to seek a clearance from the government at all. You don't have any interface with the government. You can start construction on day one without talking to anybody, as long as you believe that you're in compliance with the law of the land. The second thing, well, you know, some people might say, we've heard this before. Second thing, we've come out with a single window clearance system. You can say, yes, but the joke is there are always multiple windows behind that one single window, right? What we've done away with is, by way of this new legislation, we have come out with a policy where if we don't give you clearances in 15 days, on the 16th day, it's a deemed approval. It's an approval by default. And on the 16th day, there's another thing that also kicks in. Any bureaucrat, even if he is an Indian Administrative Service officer, who is held responsible for the delay in holding up a clearance, will be levied a fine of 1,000 rupees per day. No other Indian state that I know of, at least, will tell you this. This has worked like magic. For those of you who are, naysayers and disbelievers in governments getting things done, in the last 5 years, we gave out nearly 11,000 clearances, out of which 8,400 have already commenced operations, and the remaining are in different stages. We've been able to create nearly 12 lakh, 1.2 million jobs directly, and at least twofold that indirectly in the last 5 years. And we have stood on the EODB rankings, on the Ease of Doing Business rankings, which are given jointly by World Bank and Government of India. We stood number 1 for 2 consecutive years, along with Andhra Pradesh. So that's the sort of policy making and changes that we were able to bring about within the state's framework. Yes, we still run to Delhi, like Mr. Nath pointed out. We still run to Delhi for a lot of things. But in fact, we've taken it as a novel opportunity. We said, how can we champion the cause of industry? For instance, there was a large electronics manufacturing company which wanted to come in and set up a manufacturing unit in Telangana. But they had issues with the government of India in terms of trade barriers, in terms of some restrictions, as Mr. Nath pointed out, export-import policies, etc., the exempt policy. So we said, we will be your advocate. We will plead your case with Government of India. We will be your partner. In fact, when a state throws its weight behind an investor or an industry sector, I think it lends credence to their argument. When they go, they can as well go and meet the minister here, but they would be a vested interested party. But when we throw our weight behind, that is when the true federal structure can come into play, and that is when we actually can effect some serious change. We are definitely happy with what we've done, but yes, a lot more can be done. Make in India campaign, for instance, has not taken off as well as it should have. There are some states, which have done well. There are some others which haven't. One last thought on this structure of federalism. As long as we understand each other's boundaries and roles and responsibilities, Delhi needs to understand what it should step into and what it should not. There is the state list, there is the center list, and there is the concurrent list. I think they have to take a lot of things off the concurrent list and the center list and hive them off and give them to the states so that they can perform better. Because stronger states will only lead to stronger country. And the last thing I would say on this, Prime Minister keeps talking about Team India, cooperative federalism. We have heard a lot, but I think now is the time to actually start delivering on the promise and making things happen on the ground in reality.
But let me play devil's advocate. The 14th Finance Commission devolved, at least on paper, a significantly higher proportion of the divisible pool to states, with the intention of restoring the constitutional responsibility to states, as it were. And yet, having done that, most state governments argued quite strongly that, in fact, the centrally sponsored schemes that were cut down back in 2015 in order to facilitate this was the equivalent of taking with one hand and giving with the other. And in several conversations I've at any rate had on this issue, we find, in fact, increasingly a demand for more money to come back and for centrally sponsored schemes to be restored. Are states playing a little bit of a double-edged game over here? Mr. Singh, can I come back to you on this one? How does one balance this out? Why is it that despite greater devolution on paper, there remain the demand for more centrally sponsored schemes and more money from the center? And also, just as an aside, we have seen a marginal dip in expenditures in social sectors after the implementation of the 14th Finance Commission, which in some ways gives weight to the argument that you need strong central intervention to pursue national goals.
No, I think you should first remember, I think each of us has our own problems. Kamal's state is a different problem, mine is a different problem. And I'm sure like that also Meghalaya and others too. We must look at our history first before we can come down to these facts. It was Punjab that was at one time forced to go in to feed the country. We had the American PL 480. We were getting food all over, from all over the place, and rice and wheat and whatever else we required. And then Punjab took over this role. And we started producing, at one time, nearly 55% of the rice and about wheat and about 45% of rice to the national food pool, which we are still doing, not to that extent. But over the years, ever since independence, ever since the 60s when the Green Revolution came in, till now, it has been Punjab that has been required to do this job. So we didn't concentrate on other things, we concentrated on food. In the meantime, what happened? In the meantime, other states developed. You have the Kaveri belt, you have the Narmada belt, the Indo-Ganges, the Jamuna-Ganga plain, all developed into paddy groves, and suddenly we find ourselves with surplus food. Do you know, we are going into the harvest has just started, and my godowns in Punjab are full. The government of India is not lifting. We've got all our godowns full of rice, all godowns full of wheat, and we don't know where we're going to put the next harvest in. So this is the way things are going. So over the last few years, we decided that we must go in for industrialization. And unless we have industrialization, unless we have revenue coming in, we can't tackle the basic problems which you're talking about. We need so much work to be done. Now, for instance, in Punjab, we are a very small Punjab comparatively, compared to Madhya Pradesh. We are 200 miles by 200 miles, that's Punjab. And of course, it's history that's brought us to this point. Otherwise, we were from Peshawar and from the Khyber Pass right down to Delhi at one time. And then situations have changed over the period of time. And now we are stuck with this. Now, what do we have here? We have a lot of our educational institutes. We have universities, we have ITIs, IITs, IIMs, you name it, and we've got it. And we are producing children, highly educated children, with no jobs. And therefore, and the shifting, which I saw in one of your notes, briefing notes, of rural to urban areas. It's about 1% a year, and I think by the year 2020, 30, we will be about 50-50. That's the sort of scenario. Now, in that sort of scenario, we have to come in for a lot of industrialization. We need money. If we don't have money, how do we do this? So therefore, it is to bring, as Kamal has also mentioned, we bring in policies, or what Mr. Rao has also said, policies that can draw capital into Punjab. And we have been successful. We have set up the Invest Punjab project, which is an organization which anyone goes there. And yes, it's been said before, single window clearance, but this time single window means single window. And things are happening. And it's happening on the ground, because 50,000 crores has come on the ground in the last 2 years, which never happened before in Punjab. So people are looking at it. I was just being asked a question as to what do we, how is this, what do we think is happening vis-a-vis the situation that's developing globally and also in our country, the financial situation. And I said, I know it is happening all over, but for us, it seems it's not happening. Because Punjab is being looked as a destination and people are coming. I know Germans are coming. I know we've got people coming from Singapore. I know people who are coming from Japan, I hope. They want to put up their own city and develop industry around it. And we've got people coming from Taiwan is interested in us. So there are a lot of people coming, in addition to what we've already put on the ground. So things are working. But again, you need, when the cities, if you are to prevent them from becoming slums, then you need money. I mean, when I was the Member of Parliament, for instance, from Amritsar, I discovered that the northern part of Amritsar was highly contaminated for some reason, and we didn't know why this was happening. There was jaundice and there was all sorts of things in that area. So then we made a study of it, and we found out that, these old cities have never had sewage systems. They have been just gradually, haphazardly put in. And we found out that the pipes that were going underground, both the fresh water and the sewage water were going parallel. So they had corroded and water was getting mixed up, and people were drinking that stuff. So this was the sort of things, how do you tackle it? You need money. Where does that money come from? We don't have it. We are an agriculture economy, we've done our bit for the country. But when we need the country, and that means when we need Delhi, we don't get Delhi. And how do we find that money to do what we are doing? I can't run on what I've got. I've got excise taxation, excise money which is coming in at 6,000 crores. I get mining. I don't have any mining source other than river sand. And that's 300 crores, and that's the sum total of the revenue that I'm generating. Therefore, if the government of India doesn't live up to its promises, and whether, as you're saying, that 200 or 300, my finance minister comes here. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. He's involved in another seminar. But if it's going to be 300 amendments in a few months, then there's something basically wrong. And how do we live? In the meantime, the states have handed over all their fiscal powers to the center. And you better come up with some answers to give us the money on time so that we can bring. Why should I have to borrow money to pay my salaries? That I don't think is something that any state can, no modern state can function in this manner. We should have the resources of our own. And I think if the government of India now puts they've borrowing from national reserves, they can borrow from wherever it's necessary. I can't do that. And as Kamal was saying, the support which we are getting from Delhi is gradually dwindling. 90-10 at one time, 70-30, 60-40, in some cases wiped out altogether. So you find your own money from wherever you want to do it. And that is, I'll tell you in which case, one of the cases which I am finding for the very, the poorer sections. The government of India is to give us a certain amount of money for their post-metric scholarships for colleges and all. They've stopped that. You do your own. Now, for so many thousands of crores, where do I get it from? So then what do? I drop. We would have to stop doing it, and people will drop out of colleges. So these are the sad parts that are happening. And I think, therefore, it is something that the country, the current government. I don't put the blame on them. After all, GST was conceived a long time ago. But we have to resolve it.
Sure.
And we've got to resolve it, and we've got to get our states moving, because if we don't have the resources, we can't move forward.
Mr. Sangma, can I bring you in on this question, especially as Meghalaya and more generally special category states have a deeper dependence on the center. And I also wanted you to specifically talk a little bit more about the changing dynamics as we are moving in towards an urban transition. How is a state like Meghalaya viewing the dynamics of that transition?
First of all, I must thank you all for organizing program like this, and I think the fact that there's a representation almost from every corner of the country, I think really speaks a lot about the thought process that has gone in organizing this. And I think really the kind of situation that is in India, though we are one country, every region has got its own economics, its own challenges, and so therefore the story is different from all angles. So therefore I think coming from the region of Northeast, and when I speak, I would try to speak for the entire Northeast region. I think, first of all, my views, of course, to some extent differ from what my senior counterparts have mentioned. And I think when it comes to the overall implementation of the federal-state relationship in the past, center-state relationship in the past, we have seen a lot of interest been given by the center. And as you correctly said, for a state like mine and most of the Northeast states, we do depend a lot on the center funding. And in the recent past, as I said, of course, the 14th Finance Commission issue that you mentioned is something that is debatable, because there are a lot of issues there that need to be addressed, and a lot of schemes were suddenly stopped, which were being funded by the center at one point because of the change in the funding pattern. But I think there has been a general trend to ensure that more and more, I think, interest and more power is given to the states to decide on things. And I have been, of course, in the state for about a year and a half. And my personal approach to things has been quite different. And, yes, there are challenges when it comes to center. GST was a issue that, yes, was proposed a long time back. Everybody was for it. Implementation has been there. It's a complicated issue, so obviously it requires a lot of rethinking to be done, a lot of adjustments to be done. But I think at the end of the day, as a state, we need to look into our strengths. And as a state, we need to see what we can do. There was a time pre-independence when the Northeast used to have one of the highest per capita incomes in the country. And the reason for that, and today it has the lowest per capita income. And the reason for that was that there used to be a massive export and a lot of linkage to other economies up outside the Northeast, because there were no geographical boundaries. And suddenly when the geographical boundaries came in, the trade to outside nations stopped. And you saw a sudden drop in the economic activity of the Northeast. What we have been looking at as Chief Ministers of Northeast is really to see how we could increase that 1% of export that we have for the entire country. Northeast must add more. And I think there's a huge opportunity in that angle. Why I'm mentioning this is just as an example, to say that yes, there are a lot of challenges we face. Things are not in the best situation that it could be. Yes, there could be differences we have with the center, but at the end of the day, we need to figure out what we can do best. And I really liked the example that our Honorable Minister from Telangana has given, that they have really looked at the same thing that has been there for a long time, but just had a different approach to it. And I think that is the way we are also seeing things. Past governments have come out with very good schemes, even in my state. But yet the implementation of the schemes was not done properly. What we simply did was we simply improved the implementation of those schemes at the grassroots level. And we started seeing better results at the end of the day. Money that was coming in from the center, money coming in from the state, and programs which were already there. Ultimately, by ensuring that the delivery mechanism improved, we ensured that the governance overall development improved at the grassroots. But having said that, I think the second point which you're mentioning about the urbanization part, I think there is, of course, a strong move to ensure that movement from the rural areas to the urbans has gone up a lot, and it's my state is no different, my region is no different. But I do have a slightly different take on that, because what we have been looking at as a state government is realizing the fact that we need to realize why this movement of people is taking place from the villages to the city. It's simply because of the economic conditions out there. So therefore, in fact, just recently we have decided that, starting with the issue of smart cities, which we must do, and we are doing, Meghalaya has started working on what we call smart villages. And really we're trying to see how technology intervention can make our villages better, so that maybe we can ensure that some of the population that decides to go out of the villages because of the lack of facilities, can maybe be convinced to stay back. So I think it's important to balance out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think states need to really look at how to make the villages also smart, and really that's an area we're looking at, and I hope we can bring it up.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the interesting things about a rural to urban transition is that most of the movement from farm to non-farm is actually now increasingly taking place in what have been designated as rural areas. But Mr. Reddy, even as we talk about rural to urban and transitions, when we think about urbanization, one of the big question marks that comes to everybody's mind, I'm sorry to put you on the spot there, but it's too tempting not to ask you, is about Amravati, and how is the government of Andhra Pradesh seeing the urban transition, both in terms of what it takes to build a new city, a new capital center, but also how does one draw on that capital center to ensure that gains are had in smaller towns and census towns where the actual urban transition is taking place?
First of all, thank you all, and good afternoon to everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here on today's panel, and I must say that sitting amongst such an experienced panelist, I'm actually more of a student here than a teacher, so I must say I'm more here to learn. But however, to your question, I think it's to the urbanization, what you would say. There's been some fundamental legacy flaws. I would not get much into it, but then I would just put it out this way to you. In the post-division of Andhra Pradesh, if we really look at our urbanization of the residual Andhra Pradesh state, with what we have got, actually at that point of a time, it was Vizag as the only urban city. If you call it as a true urban structure. Of course, the previous government had this grandiose plan of developing a world-class city, Amravati, and they proposed Amravati as a state capital. And we're still today with it. It'll stand as an administrative capital. Now, to construct such an a capital of that world structure, world famous structures, it requires a huge amount of capital. It requires huge amounts of capital outlay in it. Now, in today's environment where your trade headwinds, your industrial, international, financial markets are taking a beating down, raising funds and raising such kind of things just on a pure notion of building a real estate does not sell well in the international markets. So what we have done is gone back and with a very young government, we've just been in the power for the last 3 months. So we are looking at how do we do this? One, at the same time we want to make sure that it remains as our capital, but also at the same time we also have got Vizag as a city which has got a great urban setting. It's got a very cosmopolitan population. It's a low-hanging fruit, and it requires a lesser amount of capital for realizing a greater value over there. So we are focusing on saying that, what are the advantages that we've got, in the present state of Andhra Pradesh, and we'd like to focus on that. So, and as I said, we're capital deficient state. So making sure that whatever resources that we have got, and making sure that we employ those resources to creating greater value is first thing what we do. So that's a revenue generator for us. Now, once we have these revenue generators kicking in, then you can start planning on your subsequent downstream, whatever grandiose plans that you've got. But also, let me also tell you at this point of a time, we would also like to align with this Government of India's plan of $5 trillion economy. If you really look today, the state of Andhra Pradesh is contributing roughly about $120 billion. We stand in the total, I think, 9th position. And the top 5 states take up about 43% of contribution of GDP to the. So we are saying, how do we improve ourselves? How do we improve ourselves in contributing for the future of this $5 trillion economy? At $120 billion, today we're capturing, let's say, about 6%, 5% or something like that. Now, if I have to grow to 5 trillion, support the 5 trillion structure, we need to grow probably 2.5 times. And if I'm not wrong, there are only about 8 or 9 states which can really support that $5 trillion economy. And we are actually doing a roadmap of saying, well, how do we do this? So we've actually come down to this saying that the 3 fundamental parameters that we need to look at. One is the social infrastructure. social policies, your economic policies, and the most important is also your environment policies. Sorry, these three sail in tandem. I know they need to be aligned together. Unless we have all of them, three of them aligned, don't we see such kind of a growth, a spur in growth. So we in Andhra Pradesh government, we've said very categorically that we will come out with an outlay of saying that the social empowerment will be the devolution of powers. In fact, a lot of panel members have just been discussing about the federalism. If you really look at federalism today, what we see is that there is greater authority with lesser accountability. So we would see that if you really go back and look into your constitution, it's very clearly described there. Devolution of powers to the states is very defined over there, right down to the village panchayats. So we do not have to really relook and reinvent federalism at all. It's actually there in our constitution. So now if you really look at it, what we are doing over here is, we are looking at devolution of powers. We are actually decentralizing our administrative. That's the reason why yesterday, our chief minister inaugurated the first village secretariat system. When this was a system that was actually on our father of the nation's mind, actually powers to the village panchayats. So this is what we've done. We've taken administrations right down to village panchayat systems. And at the same time, we are backing it up with a social empowerment programs, or this Navaratnas, or what we are calling it, that's social empowerment programs. And we are matching it with creating world-class economic, the new economic policies that are going to be coming out is going to support this structure. And to support this economic structure, we said we need to create world-class skills at workforce. So what we are focusing is, as a government, we are only a policy derivators. We will not get into saying that, what should be set up, what cannot be set up. We want to see that we create the atmosphere for businesses to come and thrive. So for them to thrive, between a good policy, good infrastructure, and a good employment and transparency, I think I've done my duty. Thank you.
I think you brought up a very important point on decentralization. Mr. Nath, can I ask you, can we really be talking about cities as engines of growth if we don't talk about local governments and the role of municipalities in really being the drivers of change in cities? Much as we talk about center-state relationships, and we spoke a lot about centralization at the Government of India level, states too have been very reluctant decentralizers. I know Madhya Pradesh has been spearheading decentralization a lot more than many other states. But even so, how does one address this challenge of stronger, more robust local governments as being at the heart of the drive towards urbanization?
Before I answer that, I must say that one of the points which has to be recognized is that each state is different. It's been made by everybody.
Yeah.
Each state is different. And there's no one size fits all. Madhya Pradesh has the largest forest area in this country. Madhya Pradesh has the largest tribal population in this country. Now, how do you compare that with, say, Telangana or Andhra or Punjab or even Haryana? So there's no one size fits all. So when we try and evolve any policy and we try and see, the next point is, we've been talking about the 14th Finance Commission. Let's remember that in the next 3 months, the 15th Finance Commission is coming. And in our engagement with the 15th Finance Commission, which I engaged myself, there were many questions which I asked them, which there was no convergence. So these are two extraneous points, not extraneous to the discussion, but extraneous to your question.
Yeah, no, but they're critical to the issue.
Urbanization of India is going to be the largest human event in the next 10 years. For the first time, urban population is increasing faster than rural population. And we can talk about structural issues, we can talk about governance, but let's talk of urbanization and how we've got to address this huge issue of urbanization. One of the things is, why is urbanization taking place? It's taking place simply because what's happening? From the village, people are moving to Nagar Panchayats. From Nagar Panchayats to Nagar Palikas. From Nagar Palikas to corporations, Nagar Nigams, which we call. They are moving from there. Because those are becoming the center of economic activity. Doesn't mean it's becoming the center of manufacturing. Center of economic activity. Now, why are people moving away from agricultural, rural India? You are having, over a period of last 30, 40 years, families have grown. Somebody had 2 sons. Now he's got those 2 sons have grandchildren. There's been better seed, there's been better mechanization, how many tractors were there, how many tractors are there now. All this has happened. So you have a great surplus in agriculture. The challenge in agriculture was also different. The challenge in agriculture 30 years ago was a challenge of shortages. Today the challenge is challenge of excess. The challenge of agriculture now and in the future is going to be the challenge of excess. How do we deal with this? Now when this is happening, you're having this movement towards urban areas. In urban areas, all urban areas whether it's Shillong, whether it is Hyderabad, or whether it's Vizag, we must remember all of these have exceeded their carrying capacity. All these urban centers have exceeded their carrying capacity. What do we mean by carrying capacity? Carrying capacity for sewage, for water, for traffic, for roads. All this was done. Urbanization took place by default, not by design. And as long as we are able to have urbanization by design and not by default, what would have happened to Delhi if there was no Gurgaon or no Noida? All of you who are from here or visit here very often, you can imagine what would have happened to Delhi. And so we got to look at just not urbanization, we got to look at suburbanization. And suburbanization is going to be the future. We cannot just say you'll give you a higher FSI, and this higher FSI because it exceeded the carrying capacity. So how do we address the issue of suburbanization without looking at urbanization? We have to look at suburbanization.
Absolutely.
And in this, the question is of governance. I do not know about other states. I know about my own state. Who are our municipal officers? Do they have the capacity? He's somebody from the veterinary department posted there because he wants to be posted at the district. I think that applies everywhere. He's somebody from the forest department posted as the chief municipal officer. And when I was urban development minister, I had said that we're going to build up an urban institute of India for capacity training. And states will partner, international agency will partner. Urbanization, Urban Institute of India. We've started it off together. But then the next government didn't think it worthwhile, so they didn't do it. Now, there's a great capacity shortage. Again, as we are talking, you're giving money. If the central government gives me all the money for my municipalities, and I don't know what to do with that money, what's the use? I don't have people to plan. My town planners, can't plan their own home. Where will they plan a town? So this is something which is, we got to start from the basics in this.
I absolutely agree with you. But Mr. Rao, let me bring you into this. Does that argument not get you into a chicken and egg situation in the sense that I will not devolve till I don't build capacity, but I cannot build capacity without without having done the devolution? The funds, functionaries need to follow one another.
It's all concurrent.
It's concurrent.
You cannot say this is serial number 1 and this is serial number 5.
Sure.
You have to do all these things concurrently.
Right. But the reason I wanted to bring Telangana in is because traditionally, both Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, when it was merged as Andhra Pradesh, have been slow decentralizers. And now, as a new state, you're beginning to set up institutions and systems. So just to get your thoughts on how you see the role of local governments in this process.
Yamini, let me put it this way. Like Mr. Nath said, there is a serious dearth of planners. There's a serious dearth of, town planners. So specifically to speak. But let me also put it this way. I'm also the urban development minister of my state. See, there is no dearth of ideas. In fact, there is luxury of ideas, but there is a serious poverty of capital. That is what we're going through. In fact, the whole discussion hinges on one fundamental premise that devolution to the states is a good idea, and states again devolving to Zilla Parishads and again also devolving to the blocks and also to the Gram Panchayats is a terrific idea. Yes, that is what I think Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi did when he was proposing the 73rd and 74th Amendment to the Constitution, etc., etc. Yes, you've also, I think, put an accusation on us, me and my, my colleague minister here from Andhra Pradesh, that we've been slow devolvers. No, in fact, no, not slow decentralizers, you called us. In fact, as the youngest state in India, I'm proud to say this with you, proud to share this with you. In the last 5 years, when we started off our journey as a state with 10 districts. Now we have 33 districts in place. Now we also have 3,400 more village panchayats. In fact, we have recognized all of our tribal habitations and hamlets as village panchayats as well. We've also created new blocks. We've also created new revenue divisions. And we've made sure that each of these units receives great deal of devolution through planned budget. So therefore, you cannot make the same accusation anymore, but I can tell you two more things about what is happening in the landscape of India. Mr. Nath said, people move. Yes, people urbanize, people suburbanize. Why do they do it? For three things. Firstly, in search of better livelihood. Secondly, in search of better healthcare opportunities. Thirdly, in search of better education opportunities. Yes, our cities, our urban metropolises have become hubs of economic activity. That's why people move there. Can we solve this problem like Honorable Meghalaya CM said, why can't we create smart villages, etc.? You may be able to solve two pieces of the puzzle. You may be able to provide better healthcare. You also may be able to provide better education opportunities. But will you be able to provide better livelihoods? I seriously doubt that. Why do people migrate? That's the fundamental question that needs to be addressed. Let me see, we are celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi. It was yesterday. Bapu, it was, I think, who famously said, India lives in its villages. Yes, India, still 70% of India lives in its villages, but India is run by its urban pockets. India's urban pockets are the prime contributors to the GDP or the GSDP. For example, Hyderabad, the capital city of my state, contributes nearly 45% to 50% of the GSDP of my state. In fact, a funny example is, it's not just states and countries, even large corporates, large institutions. I was having a conversation with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who also incidentally happens to be a Hyderabadi. So we were having a very casual conversation. He goes, the same logic applies to us. Microsoft operates out of 180 countries, but 70% of our revenues come from 80 cities across the world. So the fact is, yes, India lives in villages, but India is run by its cities, India is run by its towns. And the crumbling of urban infrastructure is happening purely because of one reason. There is no dearth of ideas. Yes, there is a dearth of planners. We can outsource, we can bring in external agencies to plan, support, vision, etc. But there is a serious dearth of capital. For instance, what am I saying? I've gone to an agency outside of India, I don't want to name names. They were ready to support a large infra project in my state, in Hyderabad. But unfortunately, it had to be routed through the DEA, the Department of Economic Affairs. DEA said this is not allowed. Just slammed the door on us. They cited FRBM, they cited a bunch of other restrictions. Point I'm trying to make is, Government of India has to be the enabler. You cannot be the stumbling block in the ways of states receiving capital from agencies across the world. And unless we don't solve that puzzle, our urban infra will crumble, our GDP will continue to come down. Now we are at, I think, 5%. I don't know what it will be next quarter. So we just have to watch out.
So is it that we're saying we need a new fora for center-state conversations and center-state discussions to take place?
I think you should have invited a central minister to this panel as well, and then we could have...
Mr. Reddy, Mr. Sangma, any last thoughts on that before we quickly open it up?
No, I think absolutely what Mr. Rao has just mentioned, that obviously the states need more capital to ensure that the urbanization and the infrastructure in the urban areas do improve. But I want to go back to the initial point that I had mentioned, that what he said is exactly the point which I've been mentioning, that we need to really address the problem at the root. And why is it that people are moving? He has said it correctly, that there are these 3-4 issues. But then, apart from ensuring that infra opens up, and the facilities are available in the villages, we also obviously need to drive the entrepreneurship at the villages. So it's not possible for us to just address this issue of villages just through a smart village concept. We need to also ensure that there's entrepreneurship programs, different kind of movements taking place for livelihood program at the grassroots level. So I think at the end of the day, yes, there will be a lot of movement to the urban areas. Yes, we will need funds to ensure that these the infras at the urban areas, which really are overloaded right now, needs to be put in. But I think at the end of the day, we do need to do a balancing act by ensuring that the rural areas also come up to a certain level. The district headquarters, the block headquarters, the villages, they also need to come up. And I think that kind of a multi-pronged approach is what we need. Otherwise, we will not be able to resolve this issue.
In fact, Mr. Reddy, a lot of the urban transition is taking place in rural areas as people are moving from farm to non-farm. So do we need to rethink the local governance structure too? As you said, a lot of urban areas are rural panchayats. That itself poses a lot of problems when it comes to basic service delivery like sewage and sanitation and other civic services.
Actually, to take off on what they just said, that is that one of the great reasons that we found out was what is the reasons why people migrate from rural to urban areas. In the underlying word is opportunities, but at the same time, there is also a great need of facilities upgradation at the village levels. Now we've seen the sanitation, and when I talk about sanitation and healthcare. There are a lot of times, we're giving at most of the time, it's more of a reactive kind of a thing. When we brought in the healthcare systems like, Arogyashri or public welfare system, it is basically reacting to some ailment that has happened already. But now we are going, much more downstream, upstream and saying that, let's stop where exactly it's happening. So we are focusing a lot on sanitation there. Now, if you see in rural India, most of the time, the sanitation is one of the most underprivileged area that we see over there. Okay, Government of India has come out with a program, that Swachh Bharat program. I mean, okay, they've had some certain decent amount of success over there. But it's just not the Swachh Bharat alone that is required. We require a huge amount of, as I said, clean water is required. Apart from clean water, we do require a lot of facilities that are available in urban structures. Like, for example, water pipelines, sewage treatments. These are things that are all required, and this requires a collective kind of a planning. So if any government policy makers can start addressing these at those micro levels, and which is what we are doing right now. So what we've said is that when we are creating the village secretariat system, we are also creating village infrastructure at the down level, so that we stop this immigration taking place. So we're saying that we provide the same facilities, because as you know, our urban structures are stressed. They're bursting at the seams. We cannot have, as I said, capital is a dearth today, and investing furthermore, I only see that the problem is going to keep growing much worse than what we see today. So one of the bigger thing is that if I can stop it right at the stage of where my migration is taking place, go to the village level, block level, and create that infrastructure, create the facilities, provide it. It'll be a fraction of the cost what I'll be doing it in urban structure. One, if I have to do a same pipeline in urban structure, the land acquisition cost alone will outbeat the project cost itself. Now, if I were to do that in the village, it's much easier. So when you look at the dynamics of economics also, it supports me to go back to the village level. So that's what we're planning to do.
Thank you. I think we've had a very, very important and robust discussion on the dynamics of center-state relations, on the transition to urbanization, on the need for perhaps new institutional platforms for center-state discussions, and the big conundrum of the decentralization and the importance of concurrent decentralization and not a staged one. I think we are all out of time. I don't know, the organizers will have to tell me we don't have any time for any questions. We started a wee bit late, which sort of ate up into the time for the discussion. But thank you very, very much. I think this was very important for many of us to understand what happens in states and how states can be better drivers of growth in India. Thank you.